The clink of chains echoed through the courtroom like a cruel drumbeat, every step of the man in irons drawing whispers and stares. He looked broken, skin dark and weathered by time, his frame frail from hunger, his green military jacket sagging like a relic of the past. But across his chest, pinned crookedly to the faded fabric, medals of valor gleamed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. "Keep moving, old man!" barked the officer, gripping his arm, his tone dripping with irritation. His hand dug into the man's flesh as though dragging a burden rather than a human being. The other officer shoved from behind, impatient, his boot heels clacking against the marble floor. "Pick up the pace. The judge doesn't have all day." The old man stumbled forward. His wrists, raw from the bite of steel cuffs, trembled as he tried to steady himself. His lips were cracked, his throat dry, his body too weak to fight. Hunger had been gnawing at him for weeks, stripping him of dignity until all that remained was the raw need to survive. Still, he kept his chin raised. In his hollow eyes, pain burned alongside pride. Those medals, they weren't ornaments. They weren't trinkets picked up in some pawn shop. Each one had been paid for in blood. His brother's blood. But to the officers, to the people who now stared at him from the crowded hallway, he was nothing more than another homeless black man, shackled and humiliated. "Disgrace," one of the officers muttered loud enough for all to hear. "Walking around with fake medals. Bet he stole them." The old man's jaw tightened. His voice, though cracked, carried a weight their arrogance couldn't touch. "I earned these. Every single one. They were pinned to me in mud, sweat, and blood. Not gold," the younger officer sneered, tugging him roughly. "Save it for the judge, old-timer. You broke the law, didn't you?" The old man said nothing. What good were words now? His truth had never protected him before. The law hadn't shielded him when he came home from the war to empty promises. The country he bled for had turned its back on him. The charge against him was pitiful. Theft, petty theft, they called it. A loaf of bread. A carton of milk. Groceries so ordinary, most families tossed them into their carts without a thought. But for him, those items were survival. He remembered it clearly. The flickering neon sign outside the small convenience store near the bus station. His stomach twisting with hunger so sharp it made his vision blur. He had wandered inside, shuffling past rows of canned goods and cereal boxes, all stacked high like taunts. He had no money, no family waiting for him, no home to retreat to. The clerk's eyes followed him the entire time, suspicion etched across his face. When the old man grabbed the bread and tucked the milk under his arm, he knew he couldn't pay. He knew the risk. But survival is louder than fear. The shout came the moment he turned for the door. "Hey, put that back!" The clerk's voice cut through the air like a siren, and within minutes, flashing red and blue lights washed over the sidewalk outside. The police didn't see a starving veteran. They saw a thief, a black man in a ragged coat holding food he hadn't paid for. "Petty thief," one officer spat as he slammed him against the hood of the squad car. "Guess you'd rather take than work." The old man's voice shook as he tried to protest. "I worked harder than you ever will. I bled for this country." The officer pressed him harder into the cold metal. "Save it, Grandpa." Now, hours later, as they dragged him through the courthouse, humiliation gnawed at him worse than the hunger in his belly. His medals caught the light with every step, but no one cared. No one asked who he was or what those honors meant. To the gawking crowd, he was nothing more than a spectacle. "Look at him," a woman whispered from the gallery, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "Parading around with medals. Probably bought them secondhand." The old man's chest clenched. Each word pierced deeper than the cuffs on his wrists. Every medal he wore bore memories. Nights huddled in trenches with gunfire lighting the sky. Comrades bleeding out in his arms, the weight of duty heavier than any weapon he carried. He had once been a protector, a savior, a soldier, and now he was nothing but a criminal to them. The courtroom doors swung open with a hollow bang, and silence rippled through the chamber as he was forced inside. Spectators leaned forward, curious. Some smirked. Some whispered. A few shook their heads. The judge peered over his glasses, his gavel resting against the wood. "State your name for the record." The old man straightened as much as his aching back allowed. He opened his mouth to speak, but before the sound escaped, recognition flickered across the judge's face. His eyes widened. His hand stilled. Gasps filled the room. The judge knew him, because this broken man in chains, the one mocked for stealing bread, paraded as a disgrace, was the very soldier who had once saved the judge's life. Bullets whizzed in his memory so close he could feel the heat of death grazing past his head. Every ribbon, every medal on his chest wasn't decoration. It was a grave marker for brothers who never came home. Yet here he stood, mocked for wearing them. The officers shoved him along the corridor, their boots striking the marble floor like drums of judgment. One officer, the older one gripping his right arm, let his eyes flicker over the medals. His face didn't soften, but his jaw tightened. For the briefest moment, the old man thought he saw doubt, even recognition, buried deep in the man's gaze. But the younger officer beside him, smug, sneering, showed no such pause. "You know what I don't get?" he hissed, leaning closer, his breath hot and taunting. "Why wear those things if you're living on the street? They're worthless. Trash jewelry for a trash life." The words sliced deep, sharper than any shrapnel he had ever endured. His fists clenched until the cuffs cut into his wrists, steel biting flesh. His voice, though dry and weak, rose steady and firm. "Worthless to you. To me, they're the only proof I gave this country everything, and got nothing back." The officer scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Yeah? Tell it to the judge. Maybe he'll pin another medal on you for stealing bread." They shoved him forward again. The echo of his steps filled the hall, a cruel rhythm of disgrace. Each whisper from the benches hit harder than the shove of the officer's hand. The corridor stretched like a tunnel of shame, lined with faces staring down at him as though he were less than human. He tried to fight the bitterness clawing at his heart. He tried to remember the parades, the sound of applause, the generals who once gripped his hand with pride. He tried to summon the faces of comrades, men who had laughed beside him in the mud, who had trusted him with their lives. But those memories, once his source of strength, only deepened the sting. How had he gone from hero to handcuffs? From standing tall on foreign soil to stumbling in chains before strangers who saw only a thief? The heavy oak doors of the courtroom creaked open with finality. The officers dragged him inside. Silence fell. Spectators sat stiff-backed in the gallery, their eyes narrowing, judgment radiating off them in waves. Some tilted their heads to whisper. Others smirked with cruel curiosity. The air itself seemed thick, choking with the weight of authority and disdain. The scent of polished wood, leather-bound law books, and old dust filled his lungs. The bailiff's voice boomed like a sentence. "Defendant, step forward." The officers yanked his arms, dragging him to the front. His chains rattled. His medals clinked. The sound was obscene, honor colliding with humiliation. The old man planted his feet, forcing himself to stand tall, though his back ached and his knees trembled. The medals across his chest caught the courtroom light and glimmered like ghosts of the past. Each one cried out a story to those who could not hear. The judge adjusted his glasses. He was a man in his 40s, face lined not by war but by years of decisions made from behind a bench. His black robe was pressed neat, his expression cool, practiced, unreadable. Yet something in his gaze shifted the moment he studied the man before him. His eyes lingered on the green jacket, the battered fabric stretched over hollow shoulders. Then his gaze moved to the row of medals pinned proudly across the chest. His voice rang steady, professional. "State your name." The old man's throat tightened, raw from thirst, but he swallowed hard. He lifted his chin and his voice cracked under the weight of memory and years. "Sergeant Carter." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. A ripple spread across the room. Whispers flared instantly. The judge froze. His composure faltered. His eyes widened, searching the man's face, as if time itself peeled back to reveal something buried in memory. "Repeat that," the judge said, sharper now, leaning forward. The old man's shoulders straightened despite the chains. His pride flickered, fragile but unbroken. "Sergeant Carter, United States Army. Served in the Gulf, served in Bosnia, served in Afghanistan. 20 years in uniform." He jerked his shackled wrists upward, the sound of rattling chains filling the chamber. "These medals," his voice grew louder, echoing in the hushed court, "are not fake. They were pinned on me for bravery, for blood, for lives I saved while others turned their backs." Gasps erupted across the gallery. Some spectators leaned forward, eyes wide, lips parted. The courtroom, which moments ago had hummed with smug whispers, now vibrated with shock. The judge's eyes locked onto Carter's face. His hands trembled against the bench, his breath caught in his throat. Behind the professional mask, something raw and human flickered in his gaze. Because the name wasn't just familiar, it was unforgettable. Sergeant Carter wasn't just another defendant. He was the man who, years ago, had dragged a wounded soldier out of a firefight, the soldier who would later trade his uniform for a robe, the battlefield for a courtroom, and that soldier was the judge. The courtroom was no longer still. Gasps, whispers, and startled murmurs spread like a wave. Spectators exchanged stunned looks. Even the two officers, whose grips had been iron just moments ago, faltered. Their eyes darted to one another, confusion breaking through their hardened expressions. Then the judge's voice cut through the noise, steady but heavy with something unspoken. "And why, Sergeant? Why are you standing here in chains today? Why were you arrested?" The old man's chest rose and fell. His lungs ached, his body trembling under the weight of humiliation. When he spoke, his voice cracked, not from fear but from exhaustion, from years of carrying truths no one wanted to hear. "For stealing bread," he said quietly, "and a carton of milk. Because I was hungry, because I had nothing. And when these men took me in—" His eyes flickered toward the officers on either side of him. "They mocked me. They called me trash, said my medals were worthless, said my life was a lie." The words hung in the air like a storm. The gallery, restless moments ago, fell utterly silent. The younger officer looked away, shame rising on his cheeks. The older one's jaw tightened, regret pressing hard into his features. But the judge, his breath hitched. His gaze shifted, not to the courtroom, but inward, dragged violently into memory. He wasn't in his robe anymore. He wasn't in a courtroom. He was 15 again, barely more than a boy, crouched in the back of a broken-down convoy overseas. Chaos had erupted all around. Smoke curled thick and black. Fire lit the sky in blinding bursts. Bullets tore through the night, whizzing so close he could feel death brush his skin. He had been bleeding, his leg torn open, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. He was sure he would die there, one nameless casualty in the dirt of a foreign land. And then hands. Strong, steady hands had seized him, pulling him from the wreckage. A voice, calm in the storm, whispered against the roar of gunfire. "Stay with me, son. I won't let you die here." The memory slammed into him now, decades later, and his throat tightened. That soldier, the one who had carried him through smoke, who had shielded him with his own body, who had dragged him out when everyone else had run, was standing in front of him, older, thinner, battered by life, but unmistakable. The judge's voice cracked, barely audible at first. "You," the word trembled in the air. His eyes filled with recognition, disbelief, and something dangerously close to tears. "You saved my life." The old man blinked, confusion flashing in his weary gaze. And then recognition dawned. His eyes softened, lips parting as memory returned to him too. "You were that boy," he whispered, his voice shaking but tender. "The one caught in the ambush. I carried you out." His lips trembled as emotion overtook him. "You made it home." The courtroom froze. Every eye darted between the judge and the soldier, stunned into silence. The weight of the revelation crashed down on the room like thunder. The judge's voice, though wavering, rose louder, steadier, filled with conviction now. "This man is not a thief." His words carried across the room, shattering every assumption. "He is a hero. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today." The judge rose to his feet, his robe shifting with the suddenness of his movement. His gavel came down in a strike that shook the chamber. "Case dismissed." The words thundered through the courtroom. The officers jolted, startled by the force of the declaration. One scrambled forward, fumbling with the keys. His hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs. The chains fell from the old man's wrists, clattering against the floor with a metallic finality that sounded louder than the gavel itself. The soldier rubbed his wrists, red and raw from the steel. His hands trembled, but not from weakness this time, from the flood of emotion that threatened to break through years of silence, loneliness, and invisibility. The gallery erupted with whispers. Some voices carried shame, others astonishment. The same people who had moments earlier sneered at him now looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The same men who had mocked him lowered their heads. The younger officer, his earlier arrogance shattered, swallowed hard. His voice was unsteady, his bravado gone. We were wrong, sir." "Forgive us." The older officer, silent for much of the ordeal, gave a slow nod of respect, his eyes lowered as though in apology before stepping back. But the judge, he didn't retreat to his bench. He stepped down. His polished shoes struck the floor as he walked around the towering wood barrier until he stood face to face with the man who had once saved his life. The old soldier lifted his eyes. For a moment he saw not a judge, but the scared boy he had carried through smoke and fire. A boy who could have been his own son if life had given him one. The wars had taken that chance from him. No wife, no children, just memories of sacrifice. The judge's eyes glistened. His voice lowered, soft, raw, stripped of authority, leaving only humanity. "You gave me my life when I was just a boy," he said, steady despite the tears threatening his voice. "Now, let me give you yours back." The old man's lips trembled. For so many years he had survived on scraps and memory, invisible to the world he had once defended. He had never thought anyone remembered, never thought his sacrifice mattered anymore. Yet here it was. Proof. Not just remembered, honored. The judge reached forward, gripping his shoulder firmly. "Let's go home." The words echoed through the courtroom heavier than any verdict. The gallery fell silent again, breath held. The medals across the soldier's chest gleamed, no longer symbols of mockery, but of truth, of sacrifice, of life. And for the first time in decades, the old man felt the weight on his heart lift. He wasn't just a forgotten veteran. He wasn't just a homeless man in chains. He was someone's hero, and as he walked out of the courtroom beside the judge, no longer prisoner, but brother in arms, free at last, he realized something he had long doubted. He had not fought in vain.